And hello, good evening, and welcome. You are on or listening to International Flavor. My name is still Samuel Trapp, and I am here to tell you my ideas on the thoughts, the world, and everything. What was that book? Do you remember the book Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Well, there were several different versions of that, and one was Restaurant at the End of the Universe, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, and then there were interesting things that were said in there about bureaucracy. You got to love it. And if you want a good take on bureaucracy, they did a really good, I forget who the guy is. His name is Sam something, an actor, Sam. Oh, but he was the main character. Well, one of the main characters in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You ever get a chance to watch it? You probably should. It was pretty cool, and it was a good show. And sometimes I kind of feel that way. I'm out here to put out my form of propaganda, which everyone's entitled to their own form of propaganda. Isn't that correct? Um, well, I would say that you are welcome to call me at 573-746-8020 and speak to me. I'm interested in hearing your comments, and I have no problem with that. But I have plenty to talk about. There are a lot of things that happen. If you remember from Friday on the show, I was doing some review of what was going on in Syria. And like I said, I feel extremely well versed in what's going on in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I feel very I'm confident in my knowledge of those areas, and I could debate whoever wanted to debate. Not so when it comes to Syria, but I have my suspicions, and there's been so much misinformation from our government in the first place that it sometimes is worth it to try to go out and get a different perspective. And I have found a different perspective, and I have so much information that I want to read some of it to you and tell you about some of the occupation, because once again, this all appears to be mostly about money from the Western side. Everyone knows, but I'll tell you again, at least if you don't pay attention to my thoughts, I'm going to make sure that you understand my point of view. And my point of view in this is that everyone is welcome to think how they would like to think, but I'd like to think on my own side that before I make an opinion my own, before I make my point of view my own, that I at least examine both sides of the equation and from different sources, not just from the one side, because as is all too very clear from our point right now, at least on the American side, is for historically, we have not received the correct or all of the information. It's always like, maybe it's not a lie, but you leave things out, or maybe it is a complete lie. Most time I feel like it is, but sometimes you get the information and sometimes you don't. So you hear headlines like Israel wants to expand through Golan occupation. That's according to Turkey. That I don't know. There's so many things about Israel moving into the Golan Heights, and particularly bombing Syria 500 times. I found a person kind of like me, who's an independent, goes out and does his own research, that did a rather, and it's not extremely long. It's about 20-25 minutes, and it kind of gave me a real lesson. It's done in English. He appears to have done his research. It's very well presented, and I wanted to find it on our to present most of it right here on this channel. And in order to do so, I have to get my mail that came out. But I also quickly wanted to point out, did you know that Olaf Scholz lost, just like in France a couple of weeks ago? There's upheaval all over the world, and a lot of it has to do with Donald Trump, that the conservatives are starting to win the day in other places too. And Olaf Scholz is also in that boat. He got a no confidence vote and was informed of it today. And this literally just happened in the last hour or two. And I'm wondering if maybe I should play that first because it was entertaining. Let me see if I sent my other attachment or not. It appears not. And so I will make sure to send it to myself. The link that I wanted to present on the Golan Heights, and that is very, very interesting. I watched a ton of information about Kash Patel over the weekend. There was a good amount of information about him condemning and saying he's going to investigate Zelensky. And so, and all this is in Russian. So I saw it at least 6-8 times in Russian, and then I was trying to find out whether it's true or not, and it appears to not be true, and because he didn't say exactly that, he said something else. And what he said was that he was going after the deep state, and it is just funny that you're going to get your own version of propaganda wherever you go. And I want to play this stream about Israel and what is going on in Syria, because I think it's very, very important, and that we should be paying attention. And if we don't know, we should find out more, because I think we truly don't know. And that is, and so for me, I reviewed this video. Well, I'm hoping it shows up here. See if I sent it to the right place. Hopefully I didn't send it to somebody who wasn't interested, but it hasn't shown up yet over on the other side. So maybe I will play the first one, but I'm going to go to where we are before we get there. And this guy is named Ben Norton, and he's and I listened to most of this. I'm going to try to pause him as we go through. But if you're interested, like I am, in knowing what's going on in Syria, this is a big deal, because we, as Americans, we really don't know. And this guy is the article is called "Israel Colonizes Syrian Territory and Anti-Assad Rebels Allow It, Seeking More Western Support." So, as I have said, the U.S. and Israel and everybody involved is pressuring Russia because of Ukraine. So they thought that if they could pressure Russia in Syria, in Georgia, in the Arctic Circle, in Alaska, then all these things, and in Ukraine, then Russia would somehow back off in Ukraine and not be getting as far along to victory in Ukraine. And that has not occurred. Well, like I told you last week, wanted to fall upon a little bit more of the Syria news and get a little bit better idea of what was happening, because historically, America does the same old thing. And this guy spoke in a short and concise manner. The entire video is about 23 minutes long, and I want to play the bulk of it, but I will stop it along the way and provide my own commentary as to what this guy's saying, because I've researched other places as well. But this gives an outline as to where we are going into Assad. You can take it or leave it for what you want. It's from a guy, Geopolitical Economy Report is what it's called, and it's pretty interesting. So let us begin with that, okay? And here we go.
The government of Syria was overthrown on the 8th of December, and it has unleashed chaos. The United States and Israel took credit for overthrowing the Syrian government, and both countries are occupying Syrian land. The U.S. military has for nearly a decade been occupying 1/3 of Syrian territory in the east of the country, occupying the oil fields, which the U.S. had previously used to starve the Syrian government of oil revenue. And by combining that with brutal, suffocating sanctions, the U.S. basically destroyed the Syrian economy, which led.
Okay, so that is up in the Kurdish territories up to the northeast between Syria and Turkey. And so they're basically, the statement is that once again, here we are taking control of oil fields in Syria and not letting everybody know what's going on, and backing the Kurds against Syria. Although we don't really care about the Kurds as Americans. I mean, even our government doesn't really care about them. If they did, they would do something else. But so far, that's not occurring.
Into the collapse of the Syrian state. And since Syria's president Bashar al-Assad was overthrown, the White House has made it very clear that those U.S. troops are going to stay. Reuters reported, quoting the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, John Feiner, he said very clearly that those U.S. troops are not going anywhere. Like the U.S., Israel had also supported the extremist al-Qaeda-linked rebels in Syria who overthrew the government of Assad. And since then, the Israeli regime has colonized more and more Syrian territory. In fact, Israeli troops are just about 20 kilometers from the Syrian capital, Damascus. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it very clear that they're not going to leave. He has annexed Syrian territory in violation of international law.
Now, that is interesting. So basically, here goes Israel going to expand. Now, the International Criminal Court has said that what Israel has done in Palestine and now in Syria is a crime. There's an arrest warrant out for Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, I don't take one position or the other on that. You're free to do what you want. But when we're supporting terrorists, and by the way, listen to what he says here in a bit, and he's basically it's ISIS rebranding itself, Al-Qaeda rebranding itself in this new leader. In fact, with the same guy, just changed his name. So pay attention to this. This is, and it's not funny. I don't mean to laugh about it, but it's unfortunate that here's where we are. And I hope, like me, you're sitting there going, geez, that doesn't sound right.
But meanwhile, as Israel is colonizing Syrian land and bombing Syria, the new de facto leader of Syria, who's the former leader of al-Qaeda, but he rebranded and he's backed by the West. His name is Abu Muhammad al-Julani. He made it clear in a speech that he does not want to challenge Israel in any way. He wants to have good relations with Israel. Once again, this is the former leader of Syrian al-Qaeda, who's now in charge, and Western governments have said very clearly that they are communicating with his regime, his al-Qaeda-light regime, and now the U.S. is very likely going to end its terrorism designation and recognize rebranded al-Qaeda as the ruler of Syria. So what we're essentially seeing is that the United States and its allies in the region are carving up Syria. They're treating it like a colony, and the U.S. is controlling the East. Israel is taking part of the West. NATO member Turkey has colonized part of the north of Syria, and they're making all of these plans to control the natural resources of the region. In fact, immediately after Bashar al-Assad was overthrown, Israel invaded Syria, and in just a few days, Israel carried out 400 airstrikes, relentlessly bombing Syria and destroying its state capacities. The New York Times, which is of course very pro-Israel, published an article boasting that Israel demolished Syria's military assets. It reported that Israel has destroyed Syria's navy, fighter jets, drones, tanks, air defense systems, weapons plants, and a wide array of missiles and rockets. So Syria has lost all capacity to defend itself, while multiple foreign countries are colonizing it and carving it up like a colony. And what's so ironic about this New York Times propaganda is in the same article, just 2 paragraphs later, after it discussed how Israel is carving up and destroying Syria, the New York Times quoted Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, who said, quote, "We have no intention to meddle in Syria's internal affairs," end quote. So while Israel is invading Syria and bombing it hundreds of times and destroying its military capabilities, Netanyahu says, "We don't want to meddle in Syria." What a joke. And yet, wait, it gets even worse. Netanyahu also announced plans to double the number of illegal settlers occupying Syrian territory in the Golan Heights. Now, according to international law, the Golan Heights is Syrian sovereign territory that Israel first occupied in 1967. And ever since then, the Israeli regime has been illegally occupying the Golan. But now that the government of Assad has been overthrown, Israel announced that it completely annexed and colonized all of the Golan Heights, and Israeli troops invaded even further into Syrian territory, and Netanyahu has made it clear that he has no plans to leave. So this is part of a larger colonial project in which, with staunch U.S. support from both Biden and Trump, from Democrats and Republicans, Israel is expanding and trying to colonize sovereign territory, not only Palestinian territory like Gaza and the West Bank, but also southern Lebanon, which Israel has been trying to colonize, and now more and more territory in western Syria. And this comes mere days after the United Nations General Assembly voted to adopt a resolution that demanded that Israel withdraw from all of the Syrian Golan Heights, which have been illegally occupied since 1967. This resolution passed on the 3rd of December with the support of the majority of the international community. Only 8 countries voted against this resolution, which were the United States, the UK, Australia, Canada, Israel, and then a few small island nations in the Pacific. So it's essentially the Anglo-American alliance against international law in support of colonialism. I don't think it's a coincidence that the US, Australia, Canada, and Israel are all settler colonies founded by ethnically cleansing and expelling the indigenous population and colonizing their land. So Israel is doing exactly what these colonial powers did in the West, and that's why it's no surprise to see them continuing to support Israeli colonialism today. Now, for years, Israel has been supporting the al-Qaeda-linked rebels in Syria who were trying to overthrow the Syrian government and who did succeed. And Israeli newspaper, the Jerusalem Post, even admitted that Israel had been supporting al-Qaeda in Syria in its fight against the Assad government. Now, there are some very confused and ignorant people who claim that they both support Palestinian human rights and liberation, but they also supported the overthrow of the Syrian government by Israel, by the United States. And the Israeli media has been saying very clearly, boasting, as the Israeli newspaper Haaretz put it, quote, "The downfall of the Assad regime is Israel's victory," end quote. So they're not hiding the fact that Israel sees this as a major victory against a key part of the axis of resistance. Syria had provided support to resistance groups in Palestine, in Lebanon, fighting against U.S. Israeli colonialism, defending their sovereignty, defending the rights of their people. And
now, don't you find that just interesting? I found this entire line of information very interesting. Now, obviously, this guy is slanted the other direction than where the U.S. is, but it's funny how these relationships between governments always turn out to be the same people and always the same groups that you're supporting. And I believe it's very soon when he starts to get to the rebranding of this particular person. And there's an interview that I wanted to get to where they had an interview with a guy in on a British television that they interviewed him. And I want to go forward a little bit to that point if I could. And but I think I'm going to let it go naturally to there, because this is information that you don't have to believe it. Like I said, if you want to watch some of the videos yourself, you can. But I think it quite interesting to realize, because remember, there's still three Russian army bases there in Syria. And now the Al-Qaeda people who are there are attempting to play nice with Vladimir Putin as well and say that he's part of it. Now, also, Turkey and the U.S. carving up with Israel all of Syria means the very next step. And I believe he even says this later on, but it could have been another video that I was paying attention to over the weekend. He says that, or whether it's him or somebody else, but it is said that all of this is to ultimately take on Iran, because if Iran, and it has lost a lot of backing from these networks that they supported, now Turkey, the Kurds, everybody, they're all right next door. And the further into Syria you can go, the easier it'll be to go after Iran. And there's talk that, now that they've toppled Assad, the only one left to topple is Iran. And so let's continue with this, because I think he makes some good points here, and I want to get to that point where he does the interview of the terrorist on British television. I don't mean to laugh about it, but geez, they interview this terrorist and he doesn't say anything about any of the bombings or anything like that. It's interesting.
Now that the Syrian government has been overthrown, this is a major blow to the resistance forces in the region. This is a major victory for U.S.-Israeli colonialism. In fact, after the Syrian government was overthrown, Netanyahu delivered a speech in which he announced that Israel is changing the face of the Middle East. He gave a speech in Hebrew, but there was an English language translation published. Of course, I should point out that Netanyahu is currently wanted by the International Criminal Court at The Hague over crimes against humanity he has been officially charged with that he has committed in Gaza. But while he's facing these charges at The Hague, Netanyahu boasted in this speech, quote, "The collapse of the Syrian regime is a direct result of the severe blows with which we have struck Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran." Later in the speech, Netanyahu boasted of doing severe damage to the axis of resistance, and then he said, quote, "As I promised, we are changing the face of the Middle East," end quote. And in this quest to completely reshape the region and colonize the region, Israel's next target is Iran. And after the Syrian government was overthrown, Netanyahu published a video online in which he gave a speech directed at the Iranian people, and he called for the people of Iran to overthrow their government. Iran has been one of the main targets of the United States for regime change for decades, ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979 overthrew the US-backed dictator, the Shah, the king, who had ruled with an iron fist And former U.S. General and NATO Commander Wesley Clark famously revealed that the U.S. military had made plans to overthrow 7 governments in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finally Iran. Of those 7 countries, the only government that has not been completely destroyed or overthrown by the U.S. is Iran. So that's the next target of the U.S. and Israel. And an Israeli military officer published a thread on Twitter that went viral. He likely did this with the backing of the Israeli military because military officers have to often get permission to post these kinds of things. And in this viral Twitter thread, he boasted that now that Assad has been overthrown in Syria and that pro-Western, pro-Israel forces linked to Al-Qaeda are in power in Damascus, he boasted that Israel can now use Syria as a springboard for attacking Iran. And he posted a map that shows an Israeli fighter jet potentially going through southern Lebanon, through Syria, through Iraq, and then bombing Iran. So that's the next goal of the U.S. and Israel. So while Israel and the U.S. are making these plans for more and more war, what is happening inside Syria? What is the new regime doing? Well,
this is what we saw on Friday in the videos that I showed and or that I told you about that were shown. They are killing the opposition that are these are not peaceful terrorists with a peaceful regime change. They can say what they want and the rest, but the videos that they that have been posted that you can find on Telegram and not really as much on YouTube, but Telegram will allow you to see them in a couple of other places. They are killing people off, and it's and they are very brutal, but they're staying away from talking about it. And nobody in the West, just like in Ukraine, nobody in the West is reporting on it.
De facto leader of the new regime in Syria is the former leader of Al-Qaeda. His name is Abu Muhammad al-Julani, and he has made it clear publicly, I'm reading from the Financial Times, quote, Syria is not interested in conflict with Israel, rebel leader says, end quote. Now, the real name of this rebranded Al-Qaeda leader in Syria is Ahmad Ashara. He was using the name al-Julani, but now that he's in power as part of yet another rebranding exercise, he distanced himself from Al-Qaeda. He changed his name again. So now he's using his birth name, which is Ahmad Ashara. And he gave a speech in which he said that he has, quote, no intention of confronting Israel, end quote. And then he reiterated, quote, we are not looking to engage in a conflict with Israel, end quote. Instead of saying that he wants to liberate Syrian land, which is ironic because al-Julani is named after the Golan Heights, Achulan. So instead of saying that he's going to liberate the Golan Heights, he's allowing Israel to continue colonizing the Golan Heights, to annex the Golan Heights illegally, and to take more and more Syrian land. And instead of actually challenging Israel, this rebranded Al-Qaeda leader, what did he say? He said that the overthrow of Assad was a, quote, victory over the dangerous Iranian project in the region, end quote. This is why the U.S. and Israel have been supporting these Al-Qaeda-linked so-called rebels for years, because they've been using them as puppets against Iran and resistance forces in the region. And here...
Now, puppets, that's always what everybody says about Zelensky, that he's just a puppet. Well, that's what we do. As American colonialists, we travel the world, find resources we want, overthrow a government, put in some puppet or back a puppet to overthrow part of the government in whatever way they feel like, and then move out smartly and let them do whatever they want to their people, so long as they claim to want to be with us. Now, The guy's a terrorist. There's no doubt. So we pick one terrorist over another terrorist, and suddenly it's okay to give one set of terrorists money. Just like we did in Afghanistan, it was Al Qaeda there too. We support Al Qaeda until we no longer support Al Qaeda, and then after they kick us out and take over and keep all of our equipment and claim that they're on our side, we begin to recognize them again. And I don't know. I don't know what Donald Trump's plan is with respect to some of these, but according to quite a few of the articles that I have watched over and read, I don't feel all that solid about what we're going to get from him. I believe in the Middle East, it's going to be more of the same. Everybody in the West looks at this as an American victory. We got rid of the Russian-supported Assad. We got rid of, one terrorist group, but another one's been installed. And as long as you don't talk about the new terrorism that has been installed and the roots of that terrorism, it's okay. We win, right? But Israel wins because we'll never go against anything that they say. And I don't know whether that's right, wrong, and different. When I was growing up, I grew up pretty religious in a Mormon family, and Israel could do no wrong. Anything that Israel wanted to do was certainly permitted, and we support Israel. Why? Because because God supports Israel. Well, I guess that depends on which God you support. And I don't, for religious points of view, I don't pick one religion over another. I don't do that any longer. I think there are far too many religions to believe that only, if there is a God and God never told anybody about this particular religion, how in the world is he going to, any God that I would believe in wouldn't say you can only be part of this religion and no other. I think that there's basis in truth for many, many different forms or specific forms of religion, that not everybody has it all as correct as they ought to. But from the basic point of view, yes. And there, I have issues with it all. And trust me, again, I am zero expert on that point of view, but I do have a pretty good idea who a terrorist is when I see them, based upon what they are doing to their own people. I believe we're almost to the interview they did, because now Israel sent over 1,500 bombs to over 500 locations in sorties of planes going over a period of 2-3 days. They destroyed everything in Syria, just like they did in Gaza. They're doing the same thing in Syria. I am not in agreement with the total destruction of people. They're never going to be able to calculate how many have been liquidated as a result of these type of attacks. And it appears that we're just more of the same, and out of sight, out of mind. As long as we don't know about or see these things as Americans, we don't have to worry about them. Correct? And he continues. I do want to get to that interview on British TV.
Here you have rebranded Al Qaeda leader in Syria openly saying, "We have no issue with Israel. Our issue is with Iran. We're going to fight Iran on behalf of the U.S. empire and Israeli colonialism." Now, the official name of the organization that this rebranded Al Qaeda leader is the chief of is HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which previously was Jabhat al-Nusra, which was Syrian Al Qaeda. And then they rebranded as HTS. And a spokesman for HTS was asked about Channel 4 News in the UK about the fact that Israel has bombed Syria around 500 times. And he refused to say a single word in criticism of Israel.
Can I get your reaction to these Israeli airstrikes? We've had over 300 now.
Our priority is to restore security and services, to revive civilian life in institutions, and care for newly liberated cities. There are many urgent parts of day-to-day life to restore: bakeries, electricity, water, communications. So our priority is to provide those services to the people.
I understand it's not your priority, but are you honestly telling me that you have nothing to say about Israel striking 300 sites in this country?
Have no doubt, we want everyone to respect the sovereignty of the new Syria. This point is very important to us.
This is the official spokesman of the rebranded Al-Qaeda party.
Yeah. So the official spokesman of the rebranded Al-Qaeda party doesn't say a word about Israel bombing 300 times. Well, it's more than that. The estimates are at some 480 strikes using some 1,500 missiles. So this is not what we are told over here in America.
That is now ruling Syria. And behind him, in the video, you can see the so-called Syrian Revolution flag, which is the green, black, and white flag with the red stars that the CIA-backed rebels were using, linked to Al-Qaeda. So this is the real face of the so-called Syrian Revolution. It's allowing Israel to bomb Syria hundreds of times, to colonize Syrian territory, and then telling Israel, we don't want any issues with you. We have no issues with Israeli colonialism. We don't care about the Palestinian people. Our goal is to fight Iran in alliance with U.S. imperialism and Israeli colonialism. That's the message.
And that is the message. Now, I'm not going to play the rest of this because I'll let you go out and see it for yourself if you would like. We've listened to about half of it. It's got another 14 minutes to go. And but this is called Israel colonizes Syrian territory and anti-Assad rebels allow it, seeking more Western support. If they don't get Western support, it's possible that they don't get to, they can't maintain their positions. And the important part for me is this deal was a done deal because Russia is out of the picture, having too much to do in Ukraine. And so this was carried out with the knowledge that Russia probably couldn't back enough and that Assad was pretty weak at this time. And he truly was. I saw a bunch of other ones that a bunch of other articles and videos that had to do with Russia trying to have Assad and back him and having a strong Russian military there. And these rebels have allowed the Russians to retreat or go back to their bases in Syria. It is unclear what that ultimately is going to happen with these bases, but this same Syrian leader is attempting to create diplomatic inroads with Russia at the same time. And so, according to Russia right now, there is no intent to abandon those military bases, and they will be part of the new regime. Now, this isn't good for Turkey because a lot of the Russian channels are also posting that that Assad kind of knifed Putin in the back here, and so did Turkey. Assad by replacing generals that otherwise knew things with loyalists that did not and weren't qualified to run the military, and Turkey with linking with the U.S. to have an invasion without notifying Russia. And Russia and Turkey are still pretty strong allies in the region, and they were in Syria, at least until this occurred. And they're trying to divide these areas with the Kurds being backed in the oil-filled regions by the U.S. and taking all the profits from that for U.S. companies, for Turkey taking over the areas in the north, and for Israel coming in from the west to move into Syria and take all the Golan Heights and quite a bit further and bombing everything so that everything is destroyed and people leave and they can take even more property. I'm not sure that I'm feeling all that good about what is going on in Syria from the U.S. point of view. And you know, I think that's as far as I will go today. Spent a little more time than I intended on Syria because I also wanted to talk about Schultz and his loss today. And there's another English version. This came out earlier today, around 1 o'clock, and so I'm going to go ahead and play this in its entirety too, because this bears directly on what's going to happen in the European community, in Germany specifically. Germany is experiencing a lot of economic and political turmoil, especially with what they're trying to do in Ukraine and not wanting to lose out on what they already have, especially if Donald Trump comes in and changes, hopefully, changes what's going on in the Ukraine war. And so this is interesting how leaders and people of allegedly democratic nations are taking votes of no confidence. And Schultz had a vote of no confidence against him today. A couple of weeks ago, there was a vote of no confidence on the French side. And these are the people, these are the countries that are supporting the conflict in Ukraine and beat Russia until the last Ukrainian is dead. As long as all we risk is money and equipment, but they're risking people too, because there are plenty of deaths from the peoples of Germany, Poland, England, that are mercenaries that have been killed on the Ukrainian at the Ukrainian front. So I'm going to play this, and you can see what happens and where we go, where Germany goes after this, because it's a big player in the global on the global scene, both economically and politically. Here goes.
We start with breaking news from here in Germany, where Chancellor Olaf Scholz has lost a vote of confidence in Parliament. Scholz won the support of only 207 lawmakers, far short of the majority needed to win. He'd been expected to lose the vote after his three-party coalition collapsed in early November, when he fired his finance minister in a dispute over how to revitalize Germany's stagnant economy. It paves the way for snap elections in February, and this is the moment when the result was announced.
The Chancellor's motion did not achieve the required majority of at least 367 votes in favour. I will inform the President of the result of the vote without delay. That brings us to the end of our agenda and to the end of the coalition.
Well, we can cross live now to the German Parliament, the Bundestag, and DW's chief political editor, Michael Kuhner, standing by for it.
And I'm going to go ahead and play her analysis of it, because it's important to realize what is likely to happen and how they fix it, if at all. But they have been experiencing quite a downturn in economy. Even Volkswagen has been talking about shuttering several plants and laying off tons and tons of workers. I don't want to say the specific number, but it was no small number. And for Volkswagen, that is unheard of.
Great to see you. Busy day indeed for you. We have the result we expected. So what happens next?
Yes, well, we heard from the President of Parliament. He's going to inform the President, Germany's federal president, who has a largely ceremonial role. And he has 21 days within which he can decide what to do. He could also try and get the coalition or the former coalition to have to talk to each other again. But we understand from the comments he's made before that he will clear the way for elections on the 23rd of February. So it's largely procedural from now onwards on that road to those snap elections.
All right, so if it is indeed, as you say, confirmed that the election will take place on the 23rd of February next year, what issues are set to dominate on the campaign trail?
Well, a big one is the economy, and that's because Germany, which is the third or fourth largest economy in the world, depending on who you believe, and we heard both mentioned here in Parliament today, has a lot of economic indicators pointing downward. It's also in the midst of a technology transition. Its key car industry is particularly hit, also the electronic vehicle section of it. And that has sparked huge concerns here in Germany, that Germany's heyday of being also an industrial country could be over. So that is something that's looming very large. Olaf Scholz's response is to want to pour more money into the economy, to give out grants for specific industries. That is something that is countered by the leader of the opposition, Friedrich Merz, the leader of the conservative CDU-CSU party union, formerly known as Angela Merkel's party. He wants to create new dynamism by cutting taxes. He had a scathing condemnation, not just of the performance of this coalition here today, but also personally of the Chancellor and of him at the European level. And we also expect other issues like migration to play a large role. The bigger that becomes of an issue, the more it plays into the hands of the far-right AfD party, which is neck and neck with the Chancellor's own SPD party, hovering just below 20%. The leading conservatives currently in the polls at around 30%. And so these will be key issues that both sides are zooming in on, and they've already each accused each other of not having done the math in their party programs and simply not having the financing straight. Just a quick reminder, that's the exact issue why this whole coalition essentially imploded.
Now, Scholz will be leading a minority government for the next 2 months. So where does this leave the German Chancellor on the world stage? Because it's a pretty hectic time at the moment.
Yes, well, Parliament is formally dissolved, but it remains the Parliament. It can still take decisions, but both the government and Parliament can't take key decisions for Germany anymore. So there is a huge element of a lame duck key nation here in Europe, neighboring, of course, France, which has its very own struggles with political stability. And the spotlight will potentially be on Italy, interestingly enough, when Donald Trump comes into office on the 20th of January and unveils what his plans are in Europe and what he no longer plans to do. So it was admitted also by the Vice Chancellor, the Green Trade Minister, Habeck, here in Parliament today, that this comes at a very bad point in time. But it appears that it simply was no longer avoidable, this implosion, essentially, of what was a political experiment, a three-way coalition. But that doesn't mean that there won't need to be another one to get a majority following those snap elections.
And that I find to be quite interesting. And everybody is feeling the Trump election. And I'm not saying that this wouldn't have happened but for Trump, but Trump is a big player in all of this, because if you hear in all of the articles, everything that you see regarding what's occurring in European countries, almost everywhere, they are talking about Trump and the effect of Trump and what happens when Trump takes office on the 20th. And everywhere, they are also talking about what is occurring with Biden and why he is taking some of the actions that he's taking, because he really shouldn't be. An article that's a little more fun for me is one of my favorite people on the planet, and from a musical point of view, certainly, Roger Waters, and he's from Pink Floyd. I've always been a Pink Floyd lover. And the article is entitled, "The West's Mask is Off in a Fight for the Soul of Humanity." So says Roger Waters. The U.S. and its allies are openly brutalizing oppressed people around the world, the legendary musician and activist has said. So I'm going to read this article just because I like Roger Waters. Criminal lunatics in the West want to bring about a future in which genocide is permitted, and it's up to people who don't agree with that to make a stand. I count myself as one of them. Pink Floyd frontman and human rights activist Roger Waters has said, "The rock legend is well known for his support of the Palestinian cause and criticism of Israel and its supporters. The 81-year-old, damn, that makes me feel old, but he looks good in the picture that he showed. The 81-year-old discussed the escalation of violence in the Middle East and revealed what gives him strength to keep campaigning during an interview on the program, Going Underground. We are watching the machinations of possibly the end of an empire, the Western Empire. The mask is off. We, the West, behave with unbearable brutality toward oppressed peoples all over the world," he said. "We, the people, hate it. We hate the brutality of our governments. This is an existential battle for the soul of the human race," Waters added. He believes his side has billions of like-minded supporters. "If the empire wins this battle, our children and grandchildren and any survivors of this stuff will have to live in a future where we've just all agreed that genocide is okay." Waters mocked activists who cheer the fall of Syrian government earlier this month. The government in Damascus never had a chance to make things better for the Syrian people because of Western sanctions and the partial military occupation of the country, he said. The U.S. has been effectively stealing Syrian oil for a decade, Waters claimed. "We are a gang of powerful gangsters here, and we are going to steal everything that there is in the world that is worth stealing," he said of the West policy. Going Underground's interview with Roger Waters was published in full on Monday. So I haven't watched the whole the show, but it was published, and I do plan on going and listening to it only because I like Roger Waters, and I think I don't really get into people who are famous giving opinions that might be valued more than just a regular person's. Here I am spouting off my own opinion, but I'm nobody. So people that are going to listen to me are going to decide whether they're going to listen to me or not, whether or not they like me or not, is might be part of it, but I'm not famous. So, there's nothing behind it. But somebody like Roger Waters or other famous people giving their opinion could lead people to believe them just because they like them. Like I like Pink Floyd and I like Roger Waters. He had a couple, at least one album of his own as well. And, I've always liked Pink Floyd, have every album known to man. And, that's my go-to for a long work day at home. There'll be plenty of Pink Floyd in the mix of what I listen to. So here I wanted to there's another article, and I'm going to tell you a few of these. EU's top diplomat weighs in on peacekeepers in Ukraine. This came out today as well. The bloc does not plan to send troops to the country and is still embroiled in conflict. Now, that the talk was to send 40,000 alleged peacekeepers to Ukraine from the EU. But here we hear the EU is not considering sending peacekeepers to Ukraine as hostilities between Kiev and Moscow are far from over, the bloc's top diplomat Kaja Kallas has said. Kallas, who took up post of High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy in the EU earlier this month, made the remarks while speaking to reporters on Monday ahead of the Foreign Affairs Council meeting. If you look at Sergei Lavrov's interview with Tucker Carlson, they have not stepped away from their goals. So everybody's watching Tucker Carlson, and they have said, Lavrov said what the goals are. And by the way, those goals haven't changed in 3 years. They haven't changed at all. And everybody knows what they are. And everybody chooses to ignore them. And it's lunacy to think that they are going to give up on these goals. The minister reiterated that Moscow's position in the conflict in Ukraine was caused by a Western-backed coup in Kiev in 2014, which led to Ukrainian government's persecution of Russian speakers. He reaffirmed Russia's opposition to Ukraine joining NATO. At the same time, he signaled that Moscow, this is the quote of Lavrov, strongly prefers peaceful solution through negotiations on the basis of respecting legitimate security interests of Russia and on the basis of respecting the people who still live in Ukraine, being Russians. Politico last week reported that EU leaders plan to discuss possible deployment of peacekeepers in Ukraine, with the meeting coming after pressure from President-elect Donald Trump, who vowed to quickly end the conflict while calling for a ceasefire. Now, I've said for a good long time that if Donald Trump thinks that it's just that easy to come in and demand a ceasefire, he's going to find a lot of resistance from both sides, actually, from Russia and from Ukraine, although more from Russia, because Russia feels, as is pretty clear, and even in the Lavrov interview with Carlson, they spoke about how these things, that these conflicts and stopping them on the line of confrontation and freezing them in place and having a ceasefire have only been done in the past for a good number of years, especially in Ukraine, to allow the Ukrainians to regroup, rearm, resupply, and start again, rebuild their military, retrain people, whether it takes a year, 2 years, and they do not want a conflict that is just delayed for a little while and then starts up again, and or allows Ukraine to just join NATO, and Russia is just supposed to say, okay, well, we got the Donbass, we got Zaporizhia, we got Kherson, and nobody's going to bug us about the Crimea anymore. That is not the point of this. They truly are. They speak quite a bit about it, about Nazism. And Nazism, if you don't believe it, it is in Ukraine. And there's plenty of it. This is not a false story. There really is Ukrainian Nazism. And there really is regiments, Azov regiment, that wears swastikas and wears the SS badges and all of these things. And Russia doesn't want to keep fighting them, especially when they're within striking distance, as have been repeatedly shown in Kursk, in Belgorod, and other Russian areas, that they have zero problem attacking into Russian lands. Now, I don't mean to say that the fighting in Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia are not attacks from the Russian side, but each one of those 4 areas, and in the Crimea, every one of those places had referendums and supported the Russian side. Whether you believe that or not doesn't matter, because that's what the Russians have said and what they have put into place. And in each one of those places, Russian speaking was forbidden, and the way people were treated was, who spoke Russian, has been devastating to those sorts of people. So anyway, that's an article on putting peacekeepers in Ukraine. Now, another thing from Ukraine, think about this. Now, here's an article entitled, also from today, Ukrainian chef outrages Christians by filming his show in an iconic monastery. In a Christmas program, he filmed his show right in front of icons on the walls, and people are very much against it. An ancient Orthodox cathedral in Ukraine was turned into a movie theater. There's people, the The Russians and the Russian Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian Orthodox too, are slamming a lot of these things that are occurring on the religious side, on the Ukrainian side. And but that article, I won't read in its entirety. I will just tell you that it's there. Very recently, Putin came out today and said the West is pushing Russia beyond the red line. The continued support for Ukraine has ended on inflicting a strategic defeat on Moscow, he says. The West support for Ukraine is pushing Russia to the point where it cannot help but retaliate, Putin has said, while warning the U.S. against deploying medium-range missiles. As I told you on Friday, the U.S. is planning on putting their new hypersonic missiles into Europe within striking distance of Moscow. Speaking at a meeting of top Russian defense ministry officials Monday, Putin accused the U.S. of seeking to weaken Russia and inflict a strategic defeat on Moscow by continuing to pump a de facto illegitimate ruling regime in Kiev with weapons and money, sending mercenaries and military advisors, encouraging further escalation of the conflict. Now, mainly what he was talking about, I listened to that, mainly what he was talking about was the use of these HIMARS and the use of ATACMS into Russia. And every time they do that, there is a retaliation from the Russian side. And what he stated was, and this is a pretty good translation of what I heard, Washington is instilling fear in Americans by resorting to simple tactics. They push us to the red line, we begin to respond, and then they frighten their own population, he said, suggesting that the U.S. is using the same approach it used with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Russian president also slammed the West for what he described as an attempt to impose its own rules on the rest of the world while waging hybrid wars. I can't talk again. Hybrid wars against anyone who resists them, including Russia. And I'm interested in that. I really am, because I'm not sure what the old Trumpster is going to do when he comes into power with respect to all these hybrid wars. And I got the sinking feeling, especially with what's going on in Syria and with his statements about Israel and backing them 100% or 1,000% even. I'm a little concerned about it. I'm not sure that that's the way to end conflict, is to send out more military to continue to grow the conflict. I'm not all that certain that Trump is going to be the peace person we thought he was. I'm not against peace through strength, as I've said repeatedly. I'm not against a strong military. I served in the military. I'm against the strategic stealing of resources from other countries and claiming that it's peacekeeping of some sort when it's really regime change and the confiscation of resources. Putin continued, in this vein, NATO is boosting its defense spending and forming strike groups near the Russian borders, he said. The number of American service members in Europe already exceeds 100,000. And that's just on the American side, according to him. Now, I haven't verified those numbers, but I'll check the NATO numbers and see where we are. NATO is ramping up its presence not only in Europe, but in regions that have never seen this type of military footprint, particularly Asia, Putin said, voicing particular concerns over the U.S. plans to deploy missile systems within a range of up to 5,500 kilometers. I talked about that with you the other day, instead of Dark Eagle, those missiles that are coming up. Putin was referring to a type of weapon previously banned by the Cold War era Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. U.S. unilaterally pulled out of the treaty in 2018, citing Russian non-compliance, an allegation Moscow denies. They claim that America was non-compliant and didn't allow inspections as well. The Russian president stressed despite Washington's withdrawal from the INF Treaty, Moscow made a unilateral and voluntary commitment not to deploy medium and short-range missiles unless the U.S. deploys such weapons anywhere in the world. But if the U.S. begins to deploy such systems, then all of our voluntary restrictions will be lifted, says Putin. And that's what he's been saying for a long time. And Lavrov has been saying too, even after 2018, 2019, they didn't deploy these type of missiles, and stated that even though nobody was following, or that the U.S. wasn't following the treaty or the treaty requirements any longer, Russia still was going to, is what they claim. Now, nobody was able to verify that because under the INF treaty, there were a mutual inspection protocol and verification protocol and notification protocol. And those things, of course, did not occur after the end of the treaty, after the treaty was expired. So I think that is an interesting point of view as well. So get this. The Houthis have fired a hypersonic missile at Tel Aviv. So the Houthis, Israel claims to have shot down an incoming rocket, a hypersonic rocket they claim to have fired. The Houthi movement that controls Yemen claimed on Monday to have successfully struck a target near Tel Aviv with a hypersonic missile. Israel said the missile was shot down on approach. So that I find to be rather interesting. And one that's rather, I don't know if it's comical or not, but it is interesting with however you're going to put this out. Trump says Zelensky is not invited to his inauguration. Now, he was inviting Xi Jinping. The incoming president will be sworn in on January 20th, as everybody knows. Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky was not invited to attend U.S. President-elect Donald Trump inauguration ceremony next month, the incoming president told reporters on Monday. Frankly, I said last week, and I still stick with this, I think you ought to invite Putin and Xi, and the three of them sit down and figure out how they're going to resolve these conflicts worldwide and attempt to at least work together and quit creating more conflict and try to resolve some of the conflict that already exists. And by the way, this story is linked to the other one, how Trump voted Xi Jinping to his inauguration, which I told you about last week. Trump, who defeated Kamala Harris last month, will officially be sworn as 47th president. On Monday, Trump held his first formal press conference since winning the election. Asked by journalists whether he invited Zelensky, Trump responded, "No, I didn't invite him." However, he added, "If he'd like to come, I'd like to have him." Trump met with Zelensky this month in Paris, along with Emmanuel Macron, for talks centered on the Ukraine crisis. Trump was reportedly reluctant to meet Zelensky and said afterward that he wanted the hostilities between Moscow and Kiev to end as soon as possible. There's more to the article, but I'm not going to go a whole lot further into that. Just thought it was kind of entertaining and funny. Russia's defense minister said that Russia needs to prepare for conflict with NATO. A tough struggle between Moscow and the U.S.-led military bloc continues to intensify, said Andrei Belousov, which really means Belousov. Usi is a mustache, so he's Mr. White Mustache. Is interesting. A direct clash between Russia and NATO could happen within the next 10 years, and the country must be prepared for it, said the defense minister. He was speaking at a meeting of top defense officials, the same one that Putin was at, on Monday, which was chaired by Commander-in-Chief President Putin. Belousov said the Russian military had executed its tests in the Ukraine conflict and elsewhere this year against a backdrop of a tough struggle with the collective West. Moscow's ongoing standoff with the U.S. and its allies continues to intensify and expand, he said. On such conditions, one of the main goals for the Russian defense is ensuring full readiness for any development of the situation in the medium term. This includes possible military conflict with NATO in Europe in the next decade. Belarus have made it clear that such a clash would be provoked by the US-led military bloc and not Moscow. The possibility of such a conflict is indicated by decisions made at the NATO summit in July. This is also reflected in the doctrinal documents of the US and other NATO countries. Very interesting. Let's see. Where else are we going to go today? I had a couple of more videos that were also international in nature. U.S. hypocrisy reaches a new level. Israel's occupation of Syria is security, and Russia's moves in Ukraine are aggression. I meant to make that point earlier in the show when we were talking about the Golan Heights and about what was going on in Syria, and me trying to ascertain what my opinion is on what is going on in Syria. And and I still have not yet picked, a side one way or the other. Right now, it's all just information to me and who and where it comes from. But this week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that following the fall of Assad, the 1974 Separation of Forces Agreement between his country and Damascus is no longer valid. This deal, brokered by the UN, prohibited military deployments in the buffer zone of the Golan Heights, a region legally recognized as Syria but occupied by the Jewish state since 1967. So Netanyahu unilaterally says the deal with Damascus is null and void. His reasoning, since Syria's internationally recognized government no longer exists, he no longer considers prior treaties with Damascus binding. Well, this is what BRICS countries, what everyone in the world blames or considers as U.S. That we create these treaties, and when a new president comes in, it's over. And we don't have to follow those any longer. And so here's Netanyahu taking the opportunity to say, nope, none of these. And I don't mean to laugh about it. It's sad. It's disgusting that you just say, well, none of those are in anymore. We're going to bomb the crap out of Syria now. And so maybe I am taking a point of view, an opinion based on that point of fact that you just, well, okay, the deals are no longer valid. So it's interesting. According to this interpretation, Israel is justified in bombing Syrian airfields. Now, why are you bombing airfields that have no intent of bombing you, that are coming after you? So he gets to bomb Syrian airfields, seizing ports and expanding its territorial occupation, all under the guise of ensuring its own national security. Hell with the Syrians. They aren't important. Only Israel is. And the U.S. State Department immediately endorsed this position, calling West Jerusalem's actions a necessary security measure. You know why? Because we took all the oil fields and we're occupying them. It's a necessary security measure in a volatile region. Washington, ever eager to back its Middle Eastern ally, showed no hesitation in adapting its rules-based order to fit its strategic goals. But here's where the double standard, it becomes glaringly clear. And pay attention to this, because this is what the rest of the world thinks of us. And it's not only from the Russian side. It's the exact same as you will see in Al Jazeera papers. It's the exact same as you'll see in India, and sometimes even in Japan, certainly in China. You'll see this, that they feel that we're very selective when we follow our own rules. Our own rules only count against other people, but we don't follow them ourselves. Here you go. Here's where the double standard becomes glaring. In 2014, when Ukraine's elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, was ousted in a violent coup supported by Western powers, Russia took a strikingly similar legal position. Moscow argued that with the collapse of Kiev's legitimate government, the country's constitutional framework also collapsed. Crimea held a referendum reuniting with Russia, while the eastern regions of the Donbass sought autonomy. But Washington's response? Furious condemnation. U.S. declared that despite the coup, Ukraine's sovereignty and borders remain intact, insisting that all pre-existing agreements still applied. Of course, because it's not in our favor. Moscow's actions were labeled as illegal annexation and imperialist expansion. This starkly contrasts with Washington's current endorsement of Israel's seizure, and by the way, our own seizure of Syrian territory under nearly identical legal reasoning. Well, you can always have a double standard, and ours is double standard dressed as policy. Hypocrisy couldn't be more obvious. In Syria, Israel's territorial ambassador. Man, I cannot read today. In Syria, Israel's territorial ambitions are labeled security-driven and legally defensible, despite clear violation of international law. But in Ukraine, Russia's security concerns are dismissed as imperial aggression, regardless of NATO's relentless eastward expansion threatening Russia's borders. Both Moscow and West Jerusalem justify their actions by citing urgent national security concerns. Yet only Israel's reasoning is embraced as legitimate by Washington, while Russia's is dismissed as imperialist aggression and resulted in sanctions and condemnation. Trust me, there won't be any sanctions and condemnation against Israel, not from the U.S. The U.S. approach reveals a deeper truth. So-called rules-based international order is not based on rules at all, at least not in any consistent sense. It's a system where the parameters are invented, interpreted, or ignored entirely, depending on whether an ally or an adversary is involved. U.S. justifies Israel's actions by framing them as defensive, despite the country bombing Syria with impunity for years, long before Assad's government fell. Meanwhile, when Russia invoked the same principle of self-defense and historic legitimacy in Crimea, it faced unprecedented sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and accusations of violating the same rules-based global order. Who writes these rules? The selective enforcement exposes the fundamental lie underpinning American foreign policy. This is what I say. I happen to agree with this wholeheartedly. And if you understand legal precedent or legal things at all, you too will, or even just common sense, you will back this point of view also. We only create rules for others to follow and never follow them ourselves. This selective enforcement exposes the fundamental lie underpinning American foreign policy. International law is applied strictly to adversaries, while allies are given a free pass. If treaties are void when governments collapse, as Washington now claims in Syria, why did the same logic not apply in 2014 after the Maidan coup in Ukraine? The reasoning is simple. The U.S. does not care about international law or consistent principles. It cares only about advancing its strategic interests while pretending to uphold the moral high ground. This is not diplomacy. It's raw power politics dressed up as defending democracy. We always make that claim. This is me talking and not part of an article. We always claim we have the moral high ground, and rarely is it the case. And it's really sad because as a military person, you want to believe in your government. You want to believe you are making moves that are defensible and that really are a point of defense of your own country. And always we are talking about the defense of democracy, the defense of the United States. But all too often, this defense of the United States is done at the expense of other people in other countries far, far away and has nothing to do with democracy. It is not democracy. It is taking ground from other people. The article is finalized with Netanyahu's declarations set a dangerous precedent. If international agreements can be discarded whenever a government changes due to force, what remains of global stability? If the U.S. is willing to let Israel redraw Middle Eastern borders at will, how can it object when Russia seeks to protect its own security in Eastern Europe? Israel's actions will likely escalate violence in Syria and provoke further regional instability. We already had the article about how I believe they plan to head into Iran next. And after hearing that article, hearing that analysis, I think that is a fairly good shot. Moscow, meanwhile, will undoubtedly see this as confirmation that the West's legal arguments against Russia's role in Ukraine were always hollow. The lesson here is that power, not law, defines the modern international order. And Washington's selective memory is proof enough. By endorsing Israel's territorial seizures while condemning Russia's moves in Ukraine, the U.S. has obliterated any remaining credibility it might have had on the international stage. The rules-based international order has long been a convenient fiction. Now, even the pretense is gone. I find that article to be quite strong. By the way, they put at the bottom of this, and I find this funny. I'm going to put it at the bottom of mine too, just because. The statements, views, and opinions expressed in this column are solely those of the author and do not necessarily represent those of RT. This was an RT article. And remember what the U.S. is trying to do to RT. You're not supposed to listen to this, Samuel Trapp. This is all Russian propaganda. This is Russian disinformation, by the way, and you ain't allowed to listen to that. But Al-Qaeda has similar statements, but lost it. India has quite the same in all of its publications that they are talking about as well. It is all extremely interesting, and I encourage you to get your information from a variety of sources, or just listen to me, because I definitely review a variety of sources before I come on the show and provide them to you. And I also get the same from the American side. But what's funny to me is that on the American side, you don't hear anything about this. We get touchy-feely stuff about who knows what. We don't get a lot on Syria and what's going on. We only hear about how the rebels that are in power got rid of that horrible Assad. And what happens next, nobody knows. But this is not a democracy, not remotely. And they are killing those who opposed them, slicing their throats in the street, as I outlined to you last Friday. And don't go claiming that just because the U.S. is backing somebody, or that Israel is bombing the crap out of somebody, that these are people that ought to be backed by the U.S. or have the shit bombed out of them. Ooh, I shouldn't talk like that. By Israel, shouldn't happen. So I think this is a world that is going further down the dark paths toward World War III, and not withdrawing from some of these things. It is getting worse and worse. And I encourage you to get your own information, and don't just believe that because our people say it. Even in the new government, even with the old Trumpster and anybody that he happens to pick, that it's going to be something that you think you should back, and not just more of the same. Unfortunately for me, I believe we're going to get quite a bit more of the same on the international stage. And that is my opinion. Now, I do want to talk about what we have on the show going forward, but that is the end of my opinion and commentary for now.